Arnold Schwarzenegger wins his second Mr. Olympia, but he wins it unopposed with nobody competing against him. All the results of the 1971 Mr. Olympia and the 1971 IFBB Mr. Universe coming up next on this episode of Bodybuilding History.
I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings,
There's always a pecking order. The little packers never mess with the big packers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
Welcome to another episode of Bodybuilding History. I'm your host, John Hansen, for the Bodybuilding Legends podcast and the website bodybuildinglegendshow.com. On this episode of Bodybuilding History, I'm going to talk about the 1971 Mr. Olympia contest, which took place in Paris, France. This was Arnold Schwarzenegger's second Mr. Olympia victory, and it was a victory that he won unopposed with no competition. He was the only competitor in the contest. I'm also going to talk about the 1971 IFBB Mr. Universe contest, which was held along with the IFBB Mr. Olympia. So before we get into the Mr. Olympia contest, let's talk about that IFBB Mr. Universe contest. The 1971 IFBB Mr. Universe contest was held on September 25th, 1971 at the Palais de Mutualité in Lyons, France. Prejudging was held one day earlier on September 24th at the Modern Palace Ballroom. The contest was promoted by Serge Nubret, who was now the vice president of the IFBB. With 54 competitors from 37 countries, this was one of the biggest IFBB Mr. Universe contests to date. The contest was held in three height classes: a short class, a medium class, and a tall class. So in the 1971 IFBB Mr. Universe contest in the short class, that class was won by Giuseppe Diana from the Netherlands. Diana also won his class at the IFBB Mr. Europe that year, and he also took second place to Franco Colombo at the 1970 Mr. Universe, which was held 1 year earlier in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. Diana was very ripped for this contest, and he took a commanding first place. The compact Renato Bertagna from Italy was in second place. Renato only took sixth place in this contest 1 year earlier, so he had really made some improvements in the last year. Herbert Plumans, the 1969 Mr. Belgium winner, was in third place, followed by Talib Shahab from Iraq in fourth, and Tony Lamouche from France in fifth place. The medium height class featured several talented bodybuilders, which made it really tough for the judges to come up with the right decision. First place went to the great Albert Beckles from England. Albert was already a two-time NABBA Mr. Britain winner, and he had just won the medium height class at the NABBA Mr. Universe 1 week earlier in London. Up until this time, Albert had competed primarily in the NABBA organization, but he did compete in the IFBB Mr. World contest back in 1969, where he took second place behind Frank Zane. Albert was in the best shape of his life this year, and he was a very popular winner with the audience. Second place in the medium class went to Ahmet Anulu from Turkey. Anulu had taken first place in his class 1 year earlier at the 1970 IFBB Mr. Universe, but he was not good enough this year to get past Albert Beckles. Third place went to Ed Corney from the United States. Ed was competing in his first IFBB Mr. Universe contest. He had just won the IFBB Mr. USA contest over the summer, and he also won the short class at the IFBB Mr. America contest earlier in the year. Abbas al-Hindawi from Iraq was in fourth place in this class, and the popular Serge Jacobs from Belgium was in fifth place. The tall class featured some really top bodybuilders all vying for first place. Karl Blumer from Germany was in really ripped condition, and he ended up taking first place in the tall class. Blumer was the current IFBB Mr. Europe winner, and he was more ripped than anyone else in the class. Big Helmut Reidmeier from Germany was in second place. Helmut also took second place at the IFBB Mr. Europe contest earlier that year to Karl Blumer. Big Mike Katz from the United States was the crowd favorite with his massive size and, of course, his freaky most muscular pose. Big Mike only took third place in this class, which was not a popular decision with the sold-out crowd. Francis Labrador from France was in fourth place, and the veteran competitor Vic Downs from Canada ended up in fifth place in the tall class. There was some controversy at the finals when Albert Beckles was announced in second place in the medium class. The audience started jeering that decision, and the booing got even louder when it was announced that Ahmet Anulu took first place. IFBB President Ben Weider immediately got up and called for an emergency meeting with the judges, and it was discovered that this new system of judging they were using resulted in the wrong person winning the class. They immediately reinstated the point system in order to get the proper placing for the competitors. After order was restored, Albert Beckles was finally announced the winner of the class, with Ahmet Anulu in second place. When the judges called out the 3 class winners for the overall pose down, surprisingly, Anulu was included in the pose down, along with short class winner Giuseppe Diana, medium class winner Albert Beckles, and tall class winner Carl Bloomer. But to the delight of the audience, the great Albert Beckles was announced the winner of the 1971 IFBB Mr. Universe contest. Carl Bloomer was in second place, Giuseppe Diana was in third place, and Ahmet Anulu ended up in fourth place. In the overall team standings, Germany came out in first place with 12 points, America was second with 8 points, and England and Holland tied with 7 points each. And in 1971, a new rule was instituted by the IFBB, which stated that no IFBB competitors could compete outside the organization. The officials of the IFBB convened that weekend in France, and they decided that both Ken Waller and Frank Zane should be given a 1-year suspension for competing the previous weekend at the NABBA Mr. Universe. They also decided that both Franco Colombo and Roy Callender would be suspended from competition until 1972. All right, so let's talk about the 1971 Mr. Olympia contest. The contest was held on September 25th, 1971, making it the first time that the Mr. Olympia was held outside the United States. The contest was held along with the IFBB Mr. Universe, and it was promoted by Serge Nubret and held at the Palais de la Mutualité in Lyons, France. Now, as I just mentioned, it was announced at the competition that the IFBB had just started a new rule that would not allow amateur competitors in the IFBB to compete as a professional in other bodybuilding organizations. The IFBB also announced that any professional competitors would be suspended from the IFBB if they competed in any other organizations as well. They said this new rule was put into effect in order to prove that the IFBB would protect their constitution and give it parity with other official athletic international organizations. IFBB President Ben Weider announced in a speech before the contest that they would be pushing bodybuilding for official representation in the 1976 Olympic Games. So Sergio Oliva arrived in France 1 week after competing in London at the NABBA Mr. Universe, where he took second to Bill Pearl. Sergio was hoping for a rematch with Arnold Schwarzenegger after losing the title 1 year earlier in 1970 in New York. Of course, Sergio was a 3-time Mr. Olympia winner from 1967 to 1969, and he was anxious to win his title back. Sergio had been warned earlier in the year not to compete in the NABBA Mr. Universe if he wanted to compete against Arnold at the Mr. Olympia because of the new rule that the IFBB had created. But Sergio went to London anyways, and he did compete in the NABBA Mr. Universe, and now here he was in France hoping to compete in Mr. Olympia. Unfortunately, Sergio was told he could not compete against Arnold because he was now officially suspended. This was very disappointing for Sergio because he felt that in the last week since London, he was in much better shape than when he had competed against Bill Pearl, and he was anxious to get on stage with Arnold. However, the promoters and the IFBB did allow Sergio to guest pose for the audience at the evening show after he signed a document stating that the IFBB was the best organization. When Sergio guest posed at the evening finals, it was apparent that he was indeed in much better shape than he had been 1 week earlier at the NABBA Mr. Universe in London. Franco Colombo was also on hand to compete, but Franco was also told that he was suspended from competing. This was somewhat confusing because Franco did not compete at the 1971 NABBA Mr. Universe. In fact, Franco had competed exclusively in only IFBB competitions in the last year. Franco won the IFBB Mr. World contest only 2 weeks before this contest, and he was not aware that he was suspended. However, 1 year earlier, Franco had competed along with Arnold and Sergio at the AAU Professional Mr. World contest. So perhaps because Franco was still an amateur competitor, the IFBB suspended him for competing as a professional in that contest 1 year earlier. By the time of the 1971 Mr. Olympia, Franco was already a Mr. World and Mr. Universe winner. Franco was also allowed to guest pose for the audience at the evening finals, and he was in incredible shape as well. So as a result, Arnold Schwarzenegger won his second Mr. Olympia title with no competition. Just like Sergio Oliva at the 1968 Mr. Universe, all Arnold had to do was just show up and he automatically won the title. This was only the second time in history that a bodybuilder had won the Mr. Olympia with no competition, unopposed. As for how Arnold looked, he was in fantastic condition. He looked to be even bigger than he was a year ago in 1970, but he was really cut up, especially his legs. His legs were in fantastic condition this year, and Arnold said that he weighed 250 pounds on stage, which was much heavier than he had ever competed before. The reason Arnold had trained so hard and made so much progress in 1971 was, first of all, he was expecting a rematch with Sergio Oliva after beating him in 1970. Arnold was also planning to compete in the NABBA Mr. Universe against Bill Pearl, who he had never competed against, and also against Reg Park and Sergio Oliva. Unfortunately, when Arnold was told that he could not compete in the NABBA Mr. Universe, he just went to Paris instead and competed in the Mr. Olympia. So the 1971 Mr. Olympia contest turned out to be a very disappointing and anticlimactic event. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the returning champ, was there and he was in fantastic shape, but he won the title with no competition because nobody else was allowed to compete in the contest. How great would it have been to see Arnold and Sergio and even Franco Columbu all posing on stage, all of them in top fantastic condition. As bodybuilding history has shown us, Arnold and Sergio only competed against each other 4 times. The first time was at the 1969 Mr. Olympia. The second time was at the 1970 Professional Mr. World in Columbus, Ohio. And the third time was at the 1970 Mr. Olympia in New York. Arnold and Sergio would only compete against each other one more time, and that was in Essen, Germany, the following year in 1972. So, of course, it would have been another fantastic event to see Arnold and Sergio pose down against each other in 1971 at the Mr. Olympia in France. And even though Sergio was allowed to guest pose, they never were compared to each other directly on stage. So Arnold Schwarzenegger was handed his cash prize of $1,000 by the promoter Serge Nubret and Joe Weider, and the bodybuilding fans were left with an empty feeling in their stomach after watching Arnold win the title unopposed. So that's it for this episode of Bodybuilding History. If you like this episode, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. And check out the Bodybuilding Legends podcast each week on your favorite streaming service, and go to our website, bodybuildinglegendshow.com, for all of our previous episodes. This is John Hansen. We'll see you next time for another episode of Bodybuilding History.